You dream of someone sleeping peacefully in his bed, when a shadowy, gaunt figure silently enters the room. Approaching the bed, the figure leans down and sinks its fangs into the sleeping person. After a few moments, the pale figure rises, blood dripping down his or her chin. As color flows back into the vampire's face and his or her features fill out, you recognize the face as your own. You awake screaming. Vampires and vampirism in Elder Scrolls has never been the main focal point of the games, and I honestly think that that's a good thing. I love the fact that vampirism is sort of used as a seedy underbelly of the provinces of Tamriel. The outcasts, the depraved, the bloodthirsty, the insane, and the undead is sort of what defines the vampires. And it makes it so much more scary when you're not expecting to run into a vampire in the game for the first time. And you do. And they are scary and powerful. And the even scarier part is that you can contract vampirism as well. And I would say the way that vampirism has evolved through the Elder Scrolls games is quite interesting. Going from being quite bland and generic that you'd find in any Dungeons and Dragons-esque game to being very unique and interesting that we see in the later games. It even takes a stranger turn, you could say, when we get to Skyrim after that. So I thought in this video we could do a deep dive into the lore of vampires in Elder Scrolls. Where do they come from? What is their sort of history, their culture? Why are they so sort of underground and sort of the underbelly of Tamriel's societies, and see how the lore has grown throughout the games. Before going into this vampire deep dive, it would mean a lot if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. It really helps me make more of this content. Thank you. In your dream, you see a beautiful young woman holding an infant to her breast. It is only as you draw near that you realize that the woman is a desiccated corpse, and the child is purple and bloated, dying of plague. As mother and child crumble to dust, you awaken. So starting in Arena, vampires are a very small little tidbit in the game. They're just the second strongest enemy that you can encounter in the game. And as another little tidbit, the main character can't even contract vampirism in Arena. And the only little direct piece of lore that we have about vampires from Arena is from the Arena Player's Guide. With the exception of a lich, these are perhaps the most feared of all creatures which prowl the land. Vampires are exceptionally intelligent, very strong, and very fast. They are immune to iron, steel, and elven weapons, and regenerate lost health points. Silver weapons do double damage, however. Because of their reclusive nature, not much else is known about these powerful undead lords. They are believed to have spell-casting ability, the ability to see invisible creatures, and the ability to command other creatures. They are a fearsome foe indeed. So honestly, there's not a whole lot to go into with Arena. Basically, they're just an enemy. You fight them, you kill them. There's not really much to it. Just a classic Dungeons and Dragons type of character or enemy that you would fight in the game. In your dream, an old wise woman treats you for burns on your hands. As she applies a salve to your skin, you feel the tingle of magic as the pain begins to subside. But as you watch, the flesh of your hands begins to bubble, crack, and split, falling in chunks to the floor of her hut. As the wise woman smiles, you wake up. In Daggerfall, though, vampires are not just an enemy in the game. You can also contract vampirism. And when you contract vampirism, it sort of sets you on a generic quest path. There are 9 different distinct vampire bloodlines in Daggerfall that you can get vampirism from. It doesn't really affect the quest you get once you become a vampire, but it does give you different bonuses and stats depending on which bloodline you get infected with. And then you kind of go on a generic quest line of doing different various quests for your specific vampire bloodline, and then at the end of all the quests, you eventually do the quest that cures your vampirism. We're also given in Daggerfall our very first actual definitive written pieces of lore about vampires in the game, story-wise, in the books Vampires of the Iliac Bay. There are over 100 distinct kinds of vampire in Tamriel. The Iliac Bay region alone has 9 variations with unique powers and abilities. I have this information not only because I have been researching this blight of the world for the last 10 years of my life, but because for the 7 years before that, I was one of the creatures. Vampirism is a disease like brain rot or cholera, but far, far more insidious. One can become a vampire through certain magical items or by the curse of a powerful wizard, but the most common cause is the bite or scratch of a vampire. There are no symptoms of vampirism except this: if the victim sleeps after the attack but before he becomes a vampire, his sleep will be plagued with nightmares. During this 2 to 4 day period when the disease has been spread but the victim is still mortal, most any temple healer can remove the curse of vampirism. There will be no further warning. I do not remember dying. I had been a scout for an order of knights which shall go nameless for this. A daughter of a local nobleman had been kidnapped by a mysterious character, and my captain had located his hideout. Deep in the dank underground chambers I searched until I found the girl, or what remained of her, a corpse the color of snow, drained of every drop of blood. I knew what the mystery man was right then, but he found me before I found the exit out. He took a good-sized chunk out of my fighting arm before I managed to outrun him. I figured I was lucky to be alive. Some luck. My trip back to the Knightly Order was a 5-day journey. I decided to get some rest early to get my arm in better shape in case I found any more trouble. I can't remember the dreams I had that night, only that I was doing something horrible, and I couldn't stop myself. I woke up screaming. The next night at an inn a little closer to my destination, my sleep was deep and dreamless. On the 3rd night, I died. Of course, I didn't know that I died. I had gone to sleep in a nice warm feathered bed, and I awoke on a cold wet stone mortuary slab. Dazed, I opened the door to the mausoleum I was in, which I think must have been locked. I was in a cemetery, not far from a town I knew, so I wandered in. It was a late night, so there were precious few souls in the streets. I paused to read a public notice and noticed the date. The date was 2 weeks later than I thought it must have been. As I puzzled over that, I saw a girl, a wench at my favorite tavern in that town, wandering toward me. I hailed her. She ignored me. I called her by her name, and she turned to me, smiling, but with an expression that told me she did not know who I was. I had visited her tavern on my way over to the mystery man's hideout, but she didn't know me. I told her my name. She angrily told me that it was a very poor joke, that I looked nothing like the brave knight who used to visit the town, and that if I didn't know he was dead. My emotions were a tangled skin. I could tell she was not joking, that I looked nothing like myself. I was touched by her sorrow and at my death, and horrified by the idea dawning on me of I had become. Suddenly, an overriding instinct overcame all my thoughts: hunger. Without even thinking about what I was doing, I reached out and tore her throat open. I drained her until she looked like the corpse in the mystery man's dungeon. I told in the first chapter of my story how I became a vampire and of my first kill. While it might, and indeed should, horrify the reader that my first victim was a friend of the mortal I used to be, it is my understanding that they are not uncommon first kills. I left the snow-white corpse in that alley and ran to the only place I felt perversely safe, the mausoleum. For the first couple days of my undeath, I starved myself while I considered my fate. I relearned what I was capable of doing, and found that I was stronger, faster, tougher, and more agile than before. I had powers that as a knight I had only seen powerful mages wield. Later, I discovered additional abilities such as total immunity to disease, helpful when descending on a plague-stricken city like a jackal. I also found my weaknesses. I could no longer stand the light of the sun. Exposure to it for longer than a few seconds burned me terribly. It also pained me to enter temples and other places of worship. The worst effect, of course, had to be my bloodlust. If I did not kill a warm-blooded creature once a night and drink its blood, my hunger would gnaw at me, and any wounds I suffered would not heal no matter how much I rested. Is this the moment for me to admit that there was a time I loved being a blood-sucking creature of the night? It is not impossible to live only at night, merely occasionally inconvenient. And I wouldn't have to kill humans every night, merely warm-blooded creatures. Orcs have a delicious, rich, brothy blood. Rats are a little sweet for the only meal of the night. Werewolves are a real treat, almost decadent, the tincture between human and beast. A real gourmet's delight. About a month after I died, I was having the best time of my life. One night I received a letter from someone who said he was family. Curious, I went to visit him at his tavern, and I was told about the tribe of vampires which I belonged, the Mont Lions. In return for me performing certain duties for the family, the man at the inn would train my in my vampiric abilities and skills. Though I never got very much detail, I surmised that the two main differences between the different vampire clans is geography and powers. Talion alone have the gift for teleportation, but the other 8 have powers of their own. My mentor, that is the title he used, would congratulate me after each mission I performed, and came to trust me more and more. If asked, he would tell me about the Montalions' newest alliances, who they were manipulating, who they were stalking. It was then I started to become frightened at last. They, and all of their rival clans, were draining the blood of Tamriel itself. I panicked. I had to find a cure, but nowhere could I find any book or rumor suggesting that vampirism is anything but permanent. So I resolved to kill myself, but I wanted to bring the Montalion down with me. I joined guilds they opposed and failed any mission given to me spectacularly. I thought my mentor would turn against me, but he only became quieter, less forthcoming with information, never violent. He was not concerned. He'd probably seen vampires like me before. Here's why he never attacked me. Immortals can afford to be eternally patient. At last, he refused to give me any further missions. He wouldn't even talk with me, but he never left his tavern. I could come and go, and he'd watch, but never talk. That's when I got another letter. There are several of us, you see, former vampires who know what to look for. We're patient, too. We learned it in our unlife. We watch and listen and anonymously contact the vampires we know to wish to end the curse. Ending the curse is possible, but only just. It is very dangerous, but when you are cursed, the only real danger is no escape. So we're given at least a little bit more of a background on what being a vampire is like in the Elder Scrolls. It seems like you have a specific bloodline that you're a part of, and they all have different powers, it seems like. And also the concept of you get the disease, and then for 3 days you have horrible nightmares, and then eventually, if you don't get the disease treated, you become a vampire. You dream of a sumptuous banquet spread out before you. You feast on a particularly choice cut of roast beef, and its aroma makes your mouth water. It is only as you cut into the last portion that you see the larva squirming inside. You cough blood as the larvae begin eating their way out of your stomach. In Morrowind, vampires seem to operate very similar to how they do in Daggerfall, with there being bloodlines, and this time at least, quests seem to be dependent on which bloodline you're a part of. Also, it's very hard to complete any other quests in Morrowind because everyone basically rejects vampires whole cloth. So it's basically you become a vampire, you do the vampire quests, and then you have to get the cure for vampirism because it's pretty hard to do anything else until you do so. We're given some more background on the creation of where the vampire genus or disease came from in the book Vampires of Vvardenfell. The violent antipathy of Morrowind culture toward necromancy ensures that vampires are virtually unknown in Morrowind. The temple does not acknowledge the existence of Western vampire hunting orders. Nonetheless, interviews with the temple officials persuade me that the Dunmer of Morrowind are experienced and knowledgeable in the handling of these menaces. On the other hand, they freely admit that even a large community of vampires might easily escape detection in the remote wastelands, or in the subterranean labyrinths of abandoned strongholds and wizards' towers. The Ash vampire of Ashlander legend is not undead. Sorceries and blessings affecting the undead reportedly have no effect on these creatures. No specimen has ever been examined, and no references have ever linked these legends with the known clans of Tamrielic vampires. Vvardenfell's 3 known bloodlines differ greatly in their approach to prey. The Quora bloodline features exceptional strength and endurance, and attacks in a state of ecstatic frenzy. The Onondae vampires are potent spellcasters seeking to hypnotize victims before feeding, while the swift and agile Burn clan vampires prefer stealth and ambush, first poisoning the victim with a bite, then withdrawing to a safe distance, returning to feed only when the prey has weakened. It is supposed that vampirism is contracted from wounds received from a vampire, since few victims survive vampiric attacks or feedings. The process of contracting the disease is little understood. Some have suggested that the victims may willingly submit themselves to the will of a vampire, but no real evidence of this exists. During the incubation phase, lasting up to 72 hours, the vampirism disease exhibits no symptoms and may be cured by general spellcraft or cult blessings. However, during incubation, some victims have reported sleep disturbances and troubling dreams. After symptoms are exhibited, however, the disease is incurable and irreversible. In the West, a shadowy fraternity of vampire hunters is believed to be primarily composed of formerly afflicted vampires who have been cured of the disease. According to legend, the vampire hunters refuse to reveal the cure to the disease for fear that it may encourage depraved thrill seekers from deliberately infecting themselves. In the East, the Western tradition of vampire hunters is unknown. Vampirism is known to be incurable, and even if it were curable, a cured vampire would be an abomination to be destroyed. Since the disease is infallibly cured if treated within 3 days, failure to treat oneself after an encounter with a vampire would be considered a deliberate attempt to contract the disease and a mark of monstrous depravity. In temple doctrine, one ancient tradition holds that among his many other crimes, Molag Bal, the father of monsters, spawned the first vampire upon the corpse of a defeated foe. Several different versions of this story exist, with the foe variously identified as a Daedra Lord, a temple saint, or a powerful beast creature. This account of the origin of vampirism is peculiar to Morrowind, appearing nowhere else in Imperial lore. Unfortunately, scholarly inquiry upon this topic is discouraged by the temple, which controls access to the only substantial collection of historical and cultural records in Morrowind. Though the Dunmer believe the disease is incurable, a buoyant Armigir of former years named Galur Rithari insisted that he was cured of vampirism. Initially imprisoned by the Temple of Fir-Hearsay, he later recanted, was released, and served his final years as a librarian in the Hall of Wisdom in Vivek. It is interesting that previous to his imprisonment for Hearsay, Rithari had been posted to the buoyant Armigir garrison at Bal-Ur, a pilgrimage site known as the birthplace of Molag Bal. So we get a little bit more of a backstory into the creation of vampirism on Tamriel. Seems like the Daedric Lord Molag Bal, the god of schemes, the harvester of souls, the lord of domination, the prince of domination, and the lord of brutality, was the one who originally created the vampires. So that's definitely something that's incredibly unique to Elder Scrolls, is that a demon god created the vampires. You lay on your back with a blissful feeling of peace swirling through your brain. Your every muscle is relaxed. There is no tension in any part of your body. You feel completely at ease. As your vision comes into focus, you notice others standing around you. As a man leans toward you, you recognize the robes of the necromancer, and you see a glint of light from his scalpel as it begins to cut through your flesh. And then finally, when we get to the vampires in Oblivion, we get to get even more into the meat of vampire lore and history. There's a very prominent character in Oblivion that is a vampire. It's the Count of Skingrad, Hassildor. And in the quest line to cure your vampirism, and that cure you give to Hassildor's wife so that she can finally die, because she is very much against being a vampire. Another very interesting lore implication story in Oblivion about vampires is the story of the Grey Prince. Doing the arena questline, Agranak Gromalig, the Grand Champion, the Grey Prince of Arena, will send you out on a quest because he wants you to discover his and figure out his birthright for him, because he believes he is actually the son of a count or a lord. And he sends you to a remote location on the other side of Cyrodiil to try and to figure out who his father was and see if he actually is a legitimate lord. Unfortunately, you go there and it is full of vampires, and you kill all the vampires in there, including who is supposedly Agranak Gromalig's dad, Lord Leviticus. And in his journal, we get to see a little bit more of the story of vampires. Entry 1. Beauty, pure and sublime. That is the only way to accurately describe my love, the maiden Gromalig. True, the orcs of Tamriel are often vilified by other citizens of the Empire, and rarely would they be considered a pleasure to look upon. So is my maiden Luktiv, a rare breed of orc. Unlike the rest of her kin in physical appearance, nay, in fact she is the perfect representation of her race. Green skin, muscular frame and all. But beautiful she is, all the same. For all, who am I to judge? Who am I to criticize when so many would condemn my very existence? I can only hope my love is as understanding when she learns of my unique condition, for I have yet to reveal my most precious of secrets. Entry 2. Damn the politics of my station, taxation and trade negotiations and meetings with disingenuous aristocrats. It's sometimes enough to make me regret my birthright altogether. I've spent the latter half of my life hiding my identity, guarding my secret, but now I am faced with even greater challenge. For if word were to get out that I had fallen in love with a servant, and an orc no less, I would be all but ruined. Such is the life of a Cyrillic nobleman. Curse me for a coward, but I have not yet found the strength to tell my beloved Luctov the truth. Perhaps it's for the best, for what benefit is there in her knowing? She would share all of my fears, but none of my abilities. Her life would become one of doubt and uncertainty. Still, if she was to spend her remaining mortal days with me, she has the right to know the truth. Entry 4. Joy and exultation. She is with child. My beloved Luctov is carrying my child. The midwives predict a boy, and we have already settled on the name Agranak. In truth, I had never realized such miracles were even possible, but the divines have granted us their blessing. And so it shall be. I must wonder, of course, if my dear child will share in my dark gift. Only time will tell. Tonight the truth will be revealed. I will tell my beloved Luctov everything. She will know who I am, and we will decide how best to raise the precious child that grows in her womb. Entry 6. Betrayal! Foul and loathsome harlot! How dare Luctov question my motives, question the love I have for my own unborn child? When she learned the truth that I, the Lord Leviticus, and I am no longer a human, that I have walked Tamriel as a vampire for the past 200 years, how quickly she judged me. So I am a monster, am I? Perhaps I should have proven her right. Perhaps I should have drained her dry when I had the chance. But I loved her, and as deeply as a man has ever loved a woman, and I wanted nothing more than to bring our baby into this world, and embrace my new role as father. Perhaps when Luctov has come to her senses, for she refuses to come out of her room, we can have a rational discourse about our future. I do not, however, retain much hope. Entry 7. Imprisoned in my own home. While I slept, Luctov locked me in my own private chambers. She called to me through the doors, told me of her plan to escape with our unborn child. She means to keep my baby from me. When I get free, I will find the traitorous whore and rip the child from her very womb. Entry 8. 2 weeks. 2 weeks have passed since Luctov locked me in my quarters. Try as I might, I cannot free myself. I cannot breach the doors. If I don't feed soon, I will go mad. Entry 9. Food, blood, blood, blood. I need it. I need blood, blood, blood. 10. ... I love that even when he's going crazy and starved, he needs to put ... like very literally like typing something out, like I'm about to die ... I also find it very funny that once again Elder Scrolls has a habit of doing this very salacious race mixing storylines of love in their stories, and I find it so hilarious that this one is between a vampire and an orc. So unfortunately for Agranak Grumalig, he is the son of a lord, but also he is also the son of a vampire, so he is shamed, and that's why he, after you do the quest, he wants you to kill him in the arena. But I do think there's an interesting lore implication that, for some strange reason, genetically speaking, Lord Leviticus and Luctov were able to conceive a child, which seems a little strange considering Lord Leviticus is a undead who's been around for hundreds of years. Not only that, but Agranak Grumalig has aspects of a vampire inside of him. My personal lore theory on why this actually occurs is that both orcs, as I've learned in my deep dive on Malakath, are basically the descendants of a Daedric god's creation, of where they rub the shit of Boethia that was once Trinimac on themselves to become orcs, is in some ways similar to how vampires are created, in the sense that they go sort of through this Daedrification process, basically, and it's like a new race mixed with mortal and Daedric aspects to it. And that's where I think Agranak Grumalig's genetics come together, is that he took the genetics of Molag Bal and the genetics of Malakath, and you put the two together, and somehow you were able to make a child from that. And he got aspects of Malakath and Molag Bal, the vampire stuff, in him as well. And that's why he's so powerful. He's got the genetic stuff of two different Daedric princes inside of him. Another great vampire storyline in Oblivion is when you stumble upon the quest of the Order of the Virtuous Blood, which is sort of a silly storyline of a vampire infiltrating a vampire hunting society and turning the organization against itself, and then you have to defeat the vampire of it. But it also gives you access to a book, The Immortal Blood, which gives us an even more interesting lore deep dive into the other vampire races of Tamriel that we don't get to see because we haven't gone to them yet. The moon and stars were hidden from sight, making that particular quiet night especially dark. The town guard had to carry torches to make their rounds, but the man who came to call at my chapel carried no light with him. I came to learn that Morvath Pikun, hope I'm saying that right, could see in the dark almost as well as the light, an excellent talent considering his interests were exclusively nocturnal. One of my acolytes brought him to me, and from the look of him at first I thought he was in need of healing. He was pale to the point of obsolescence, with a face that looked like it had been very handsome before some unspeakable suffering. The dark circles under his eyes bespoke exhaustion, but the eyes themselves were alert, intense, almost insane. He quickly dismissed my notion that he himself was ill, though he did want to discuss a specific disease. Vampirism, he said, and then paused at my quizzical look. I was told that you were with someone I should seek out for help understanding it. Who told you that? I asked with a smile. Tessina Gray. I immediately remembered her. A brave, beautiful knight who had needed my assistance separating fact from fiction on the subject of the vampire. It had been 2 years, and I never heard whether my advice had proven effective. You spoken to her? How is her ladyship? I asked. Dead, Movarth replied coldly, and then responding to my shock, he added to perhaps soften the blow. She said your advice was invaluable, at least for one of the vampires. When I last talked to her, she was tracking another. It killed her. Then the advice I gave her was not enough, I sighed. Why do you think it would be enough for you? I was a teacher once myself years ago, he said. Not in a university, a trainer in the Fighters Guild. But I know that if a student doesn't ask the right questions, the teacher cannot be responsible for his failure. I intend to ask you the right questions. And that he did. For hours he asked questions and I answered what I could, but he never volunteered any information about himself. He never smiled. He only studied me with those intense eyes of his, committing every word I said to memory. Finally, I turned the questioning around. You said you were a trainer at the Fighters Guild. Are you on an assignment for them? No, he said curtly, and I finally could detect some wariness in those feverish eyes of his. I would like to continue this tomorrow night if I could. I need to get some sleep and absorb this. You sleep during the day? I smiled. To my surprise, he returned the smile, though it was more of a grimace. When tracking your prey, you adapt their habits. The next day, he did return with more questions, these ones very specific. He wanted to know about the vampires of eastern Skyrim. I told him about the powerful tribe, the Volkihar, paranoid and cruel, whose very breath could freeze their victims' blood in the veins. I explained to him how they lived beneath the ice of remote haunted lakes, never venturing into the world of men except to feed. Movar Pikun, I have no idea to pronounce this, listened carefully and asked more questions into the night, until at last he was ready to leave. I will not see you for a few days, he said, but I will return and tell you how helpful your information has been. True to his word, the man returned to my chapel shortly after midnight 4 days later. There was a fresh scar on his cheek, but he was smiling that grim but satisfied smile of his. Your advice helped me very much, he said, but you should know that the Volkihar have an additional ability you didn't mention. They can reach through the ice of their lakes without breaking it. It was quite a nasty surprise, being grabbed from below without warning. How remarkable, I said with a laugh, and terrifying. You're lucky you survived. I don't believe in luck. I believe in knowledge and training. Your information helped me, and my skill at melee combat sealed the bloodsucker's fate. I've never believed in weaponry of any kind. Too many unknowns. Even the best swordsmith has created a flawed blade. But you know what your body is capable of. I know I can land 1,000 blows without losing my balance, provided I get the first strike. The first strike, I murmured, so you must never be surprised. That is why I came to you, said Morvthar. You know more than anyone alive about these monsters, and all their cursed varieties across the land. Now you must tell me about the vampires of northern Valenwood. I did as he asked, and once again his questions taxed my knowledge. There were many tribes to cover. Bon Samu, who were indistinguishable from Bosmer except when seen by candlelight. The Kirlith, who could disintegrate into mist. The Yakef, who swallowed men whole. The dread Telboth, who preyed on children. eventually taking their place in the family, waiting patiently for years before murdering them all in their unnatural hunger. Once again he bade me farewell, promising to return in a few weeks. And once again he returned, as he said, just after midnight. This time Morfar had no fresh scars, but he again had new information. "You were wrong about the Kirlith being unable to vaporize when pushed under water," he said, patting my shoulder fondly. "Fortunately, they cannot travel far in their mist form, and I was able to track it down." "It must have surprised it fearfully. Your field knowledge is becoming impressive," I said. "I should have had an acolyte like you decades ago." "Now tell me," he said, "of vampires of Cyrodiil." I told him what I could. There was but one tribe in Cyrodiil, a powerful clan who had ousted all other competitors, but much like the Imperials themselves had done. Their true name was unknown, lost in history, but they were experts at concealment. If they kept themselves well fed, they were indistinguishable from living persons. They were cultured, more civilized than the vampires of the provinces, preferring to feed on victims while they were asleep, unaware. "They will be difficult to surprise," Morvar frowned, "but I will seek one out and tell you what I learn. And then you will tell me of the vampires of High Rock and Hammerfell and elsewhere in Blackmarsh and Morrowind and the Somerset Isles, yes?" I nodded, knowing then that this was a man on an eternal quest. He wouldn't be satisfied with but the barest hint of things were. He needed to know it all. He did not return for a month, and on the night that he did I could see his frustration and despair, though there were no lights burning in my chapel. "I failed," he said, as I lit a candle. "You were right, I could not find a single one." I brought the light up to my face and smiled. He was surprised, even stunned, by the pallor of my flesh, the dark hunger in my ageless eyes, and the teeth. Oh yes, I think the teeth definitely surprised the man who could not afford to be surprised. "I haven't fed in 72 hours, I explained, as I fell on him. He did not land the first blow, or the last. So, we get an even more interesting look into the different aspects of vampires. We get an interesting look at the Volkihar of Eastern Skyrim. We'll get to see the Volkihar again in Skyrim. We also get to learn about the vampires of Valenwood and their sort of abilities of illusion and sneakiness, which I think is really cool and specific to Valenwood. If we ever go to Valenwood, I would love to interact with those vampires, sort of similar how eventually we interact with the Volkihar when we go to Skyrim. And this also gives us a good idea of how the vampires in Cyrodiil operate, which seem to be purely through sort of Machiavellian means. They don't really seem to be very powerful and strong, but they seem to be using subterfuge and influence to try to run the world how they see, basically. And this takes us to the next area where we get to get some more vampire lore in Oblivion, which is in Oblivion's expansion Vile Lair, where you get sort of a cool hangout spot for your character, but also some important books that give you some very interesting background on vampires. And that brings us to the Manifesto Cyrodiil Vampirum, which gives us sort of the lowdown of how vampires in Cyrodiil are supposed to operate. "To you whom we have seen stalking at night by eyes keen, transcendent of savages, sating thirst, sans avarice, your coffers stay stuffed, by social graces robust. None know your nature, save us. None share your fate, save us. None welcome you as kin, save us. On our order, know first that we are no simple tribe of savages tearing throats with the orgiastic abandon of our scattered tribal brethren. Ours is a civil fraternity to which we are bound, every one, by our dual hunger for flesh and influence. By the virtue of imperial structure and bureaucracy, Cyrodiil has become our stronghold in the Third Era, and we suffer no savage rivals within our boundaries, reveal ourselves to no one, and manipulate the hand of society to meet out our agendas. On our dual patrons, to kin-father Molag Bal, who brought forth the blood matron LeMay to spite Arkay, we owe our existence, as do all vampires. Though not all honor him, for him we revel in the feast and acknowledge the gift adrift in our veins, to patron Clavicus Vile. Beyond our affairs, we owe our successes in social stature. Our bond with Vile makes us unique among our kind. For his guidance steals our savage craving with reason and savvy. For him we live amidst mankind and twist them to our will from offices of power. On our rivals, most barbaric tribes think themselves powerful by the gift of Baal's blood alone, and squander the gift. There are those, however, who show signs of enlightenment and earn our attention. Those such as Glenmorrow Word, who live within the walls of Breton cities, or the wet-fanged sodality of Blackmarsh, who use magic to keep captives catatonic and harvest from them the red nectar. These foes may one day threaten to impugn our sovereignty within the boundaries of Cyrodiil, thus compelling our vigilance. Should any encroach upon our dominion, our wrath must be swift and total. On our conduct, to preserve our ideals and way of life, 2 primary edicts shall be observed. Above all, reveal thyself and our order to no other, for discretion is the greatest of our virtues. Do not feed where you may be found out, or on those who may not suspect your passing. Avoid daylight by lifestyle. Dispel common belief in our kind and maintain supple appearance through satisfaction of our thirst. Second, devote your pursuits to the procurement of influence, political and otherwise. Our strength is not in physical numbers, but in skillful manipulation of society. Always be mindful of our patrons, and preserve the order. Devote yourself to these ideals, always, and the order shall count you amongst our own. So, we get even more background on the different tribes of vampires throughout Cyrodiil. And it seems like the other tribes, the vampire tribes of Blackmarsh and of High Rock, seem to be the competitors to the Cyrodiil vampires. But it does seem like the Cyrodiil vampires are numero uno in the vampire world. And it also seems like they not just only worship Molag Bal, who is the reason why they exist, they also worship Clavicus Vile, who is the Daedric god of trickery and bargains, which obviously makes sense with the way they operate, sort of in the shadows and tricking people and using power and status to get what they want. So it really shows that vampires in Tamriel really run the gambit. They can be anything from the dashing Machiavellian rogue to sort of the lowbrow savages that you can see in Skyrim or in random places all throughout the world. And then another book in the Vile Lair in Oblivion gives us an even more brutal depiction of the creation of vampires in the book Opuscusculus Lamebal Tal Mesmorteri. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. It seems a little up to interpretation. I don't know. As brighter grows light, darker becomes shadow. So it passed that the Daedra Molag Bal looked on Arche and thought the Aedra prideful of his dominion o'er the death of man and Mer, and it was sooth. Baal, whose sphere is the wanton oppression and entrapment of mortal souls, sought to thwart Arche, who knew that not man nor Mer nor beast folk of all of Nirn could escape eventual death. The Aedra was doubtless of his sphere, and so Molag Bal set upon Nirn to best death. Tamriel was still young and filled with danger and wondrous magic when Baal walked in the aspect of a man and took a virgin, Lamé Belfag, from the Nedic peoples. Savage and loveless, Baal profaned her body, and her screams became the shrieking winds which still haunt certain winding fjords of Skyrim. Shedding a lone droplet of blood on her brow, Baal left Nirn, having sown his wrath. Violated and comatose, Lamé was found by nomads and cared for. A fortnight hence, the nomad weird woman enshrouded Lamé in pall, for she had passed into death. In their way, the nomads built a bonfire to immolate the husk. That night, Lamé rose from her funeral pyre and set upon the coven. Still aflame, she ripped the throats of the women, ate the eyes of the children, and raped their men as cruelly as Baal had ravished her. And so Lamé, who is known to us as Blood Matron, imprecated her foul aspect upon the folk of Tamriel, and begat a brood of countless abominations, from which came the vampires, most cunning of the night horrors. And so was the scourge of undeath wrought upon Tamriel, cruelly mocking Arche's rhythm of life and death, through all coming eras of the Etada, and forth all his madness. Arche knew this could not be undone. So, we got a very brutal creation myth of the vampires. Basically, Baal raping this one woman, who then is taken in by this tribe of nomads in Skyrim, and it seems like she then kills all the women, eats all the children's eyes, and then rapes all of the men, which I don't know how that occurred. Hopefully there wasn't some sort of, I don't know, hopefully it's just a normal type of rape, not, who knows how that happened. Who knows how this woman raped a bunch of men. We'll leave that up to your imagination. I think it's a great way of illustrating how powerful and crazy the vampires and how sort of depraved and vicious, and it really is about blood and guts and eating flesh for them and performing disgusting acts. And it really is like just adds this great color to the underside belly of how people operate when they're vampires in Tamriel. And I think that like these books are like the perfect example of that. In your dream, you open your eyes to a beautiful blue sky. The sun is bright, but you feel cool, even a bit damp. You draw a breath but begin to cough as you expel blood and dirt that you've inhaled into your lungs. As you try to draw another, you see a shovel of dirt being emptied onto your face. The sunlight grows fainter as you view it through the soil that covers your body. You scream, but your mouth fills with dirt before you can make a sound. Now, unfortunately, we get to Skyrim. And I don't want to say Skyrim treat vampires poorly, but I think that there leaves a lot to be desired as far as lore is concerned. The vampires you meet in Skyrim are the Volkihar clan that you hear about in the Immortal Blood book. And your interactions with them is when you play through the Skyrim expansion Dawnguard, where you can either choose to play as the Dawnguard hunting vampires, or you can choose to join the Volkihar clan and then fight the Dawnguard. To be perfectly honest, I missed playing this expansion when Skyrim first came out, and I played it for this video. I'm going to jam my review of that expansion into this video right now. It's not that great, honestly. The vampire powers seem a little shoehorned in there, sort of the same way that I think werewolves got sort of shoehorned into the game. Transforming into a separate beast with a separate set of things kind of, for me, messes with the flow of an Elder Scrolls game. That's the thing I like about an Elder Scrolls game, is that all the abilities and weapons you have all kind of flow from into a battle, whereas like you have to take a moment, stop, transform into the beast, and then fight. It's not really my bag. And like the puzzles in the Dawnguard game kind of suck. It's like finding just stuff in a room. It's not very fun. The lore stuff, there is actually a fair amount of lore is explored in Dawnguard, but not really much in the way of vampire lore. They admit, at least in the expansion, that Molag Bal is the creator of vampires, but they don't really even acknowledge all this other lore that we've just covered, basically. It's just they're vampires now. You do cover a lot of what the Soul Cairn is, which is a really boring level in the game, in the expansion of Dawnguard. You also get to cover a lot of what actually the Elder Scrolls are. If I make a video on what the actual Elder Scrolls are, I will probably be referencing Dawnguard a lot, because there's a lot of reading the Elder Scrolls in that expansion, so that's cool. And then there's also a lot of lore exploration on the Falmer and the Snow Elves, which is also cool, and Ariel's bow is involved, and that's all kind of interesting and cool. But there really isn't much exploration into the lore of vampires. There isn't really much expansion on this lore that is, I think, so well expanded upon in Oblivion. And it seems very much like a lost opportunity. Since it's been so long since another Elder Scrolls game has come out, the community itself has sort of stepped in to fill the lack of lore. And mostly when I say that, I mean that it's more the fact that a lot of the community has an infatuation with your companion Serena through the game. Mostly with horny fan art and horny mods that you can install to make her marry you or make love to you, whatever you particularly want to do. I also have to say, I love all the different variations of fan art of Serena that you can find on True STL. It really shows that the people that play these games are well-adjusted people, you know? Just some really well-adjusted, normal people that play this game. And I feel like I feel like this is the consequence of there not being that much lore being mentioned in the expansion. I feel like if they expanded upon the Oblivion lore about vampires, we wouldn't have all this horny posting. There would be more interesting things to talk about rather than just making a horny post about Serena. But maybe I'm wrong about that. There might be actually more horny posts if there was more lore being explored in Dawnguard. But either way, that's my sort of quick little review of the Dawnguard expansion. It's not great. I would actually say it's probably one of the worst expansions of any Elder Scrolls game. That's not saying a whole lot because I don't really think the expansions are that great to begin with. I mean, the Shivering Isles is the best one, but, you know, it's not that bad. It's okay. But it's sort of a lost opportunity that they didn't expand upon the lore more in Skyrim. I kind of feel like they reference some of the Oblivion lore of the vampires, which is cool, but they don't really move it forward at all. They explore plenty of other things, which I think is cool, but the vampire stuff doesn't really get expanded upon. So hopefully maybe we'll see what the Alakir vampires are like in Hammerfell when we eventually at some point get to play Elder Scrolls 6. Well, thanks for joining me on this lengthy deep dive into the vampires of Elder Scrolls. It would mean a lot if you would like the video and subscribe to the channel. And if you'd consider becoming a channel member, goes a long way to helping me make more of this content. Thank you.